Hi, friends. I'm not a big YouTuber or influencer or videographer, but I thought just as an experiment to share something with you around my approach to research. And the programmatic quote that I use in my own PhD dissertation comes from Wenzel van Heesteen. Please go and look it up. He is one of South Africa's best exports to the US. He was at Princeton Seminary, leading figure in the whole theology science conversation. And this is a quote that comes way back from 2006 from his book published after his Gifford lectures, Alone in the World. But for me, it just kind of encompasses everything that's necessary to do practical theology research, to formulate your research proposal. But let's just dive into it quickly. Contemporary forms of post-foundational epistemology, and you notice that I've highlighted that, have convincingly shown that it has become impossible and certainly implausible event to talk about theology and science in any generic, abstract, or acontextual sense. This increasing awareness of the radical social and historical contextuality of all our rational reflection should make it abundantly clear that in interdisciplinary dialogue, the rather vague terms theology and science should be replaced by a focus on specific theologians who are trying to do very specific kinds of theologies and are attempting to enter into interdisciplinary dialogue with very specific scientists working within specified sciences on clearly defined shared problems. Problems is, it's a problem that my face is in the way. But anyway, so you might personally think to yourself, well, I'm not doing a dissertation or a thesis on theology and science per se, and that might be true. But one of the axioms that I live by in terms of practical theology is that practical theology almost lives and dies by its interdisciplinary nature or its even transdisciplinary nature. It's a bit of an off-color quote, but one of the quotes that I really find, direction-giving or thought-provoking is a quote by Graham Ward, Oxford theologian, that said, theology is the queen of sciences, but it's also the whore of sciences. In other words, theology does not have a subject matter. It doesn't have a subject matter like, or an object of study like physical particles or social relations. It does study that, but eventually it wants to study the nature of God and God in relation to everything else. So in that sense, it's the queen of sciences because everything in relation to everything else, the universe and God, but also it's kind of coming with beggar's hands because it doesn't have its own object of study. So I think practical theology is inherently interdisciplinary, and if you go and read the literature, you would find that most practical theologians would concur with that starting point. So dialogue is extremely important. I'm going to start with the end. All of research, I believe, starts with what I call an itch that needs to be scratched, or a wound. Fulkerson, great practical theologian, speaks about theology always practical theology starting with the wound that needs to be healed. So what is your problem? What do you want to address? What do you want to understand more deeply? Or what would you like to fix, if that would be the right word? What is your problem? And that's why in all the templates for the research proposals, you have a very definite section that needs to address the research problem. So when you go into a practical theological mode and you want to address that problem, you want to research that problem, you could obviously address that problem from various angles, from various subject matters. But if you have a clearly defined problem, and if that problem could be understood by people in other fields, if you could have a shared language all about that problem, that would be a good starting place. So I always tell people, when you do research, what's your problem? What do you want to fix? But let's go back to the beginning, or more or less to the beginning. Let's talk about you wanting to solve this problem. You as a researcher, or perhaps as a research team, but in your case it will be you yourself as a person, would like to research this problem. Who are you? Where do you come from? You are, in the words of Wenzel van Aystel, radically, socially, historically contextual. You are contingent. You are limited. So I always advise students to have a portion of your research proposal, when you introduce the problem, say where you're coming from, and especially tell the story in relation to the problem. So say, for example, you want to research the use of the Revised Common Lectionary in services. You could tell a story. I was struggling to organize my own preaching, and I was wondering if series preaching would work, or just going off the cuff, or randomly selected tests. And then I discovered the RCL, and I did some research on that. And I'm in a Dutch Reformed church that doesn't really use the lectionary, or it started to use the lectionary. You get the idea. This is where you, perhaps I'm using a red flag word here, where the intersectionality of your own positioning comes into play. Where are you socially located? Where are you culturally located, linguistically, church-wise? Research is coming from somewhere. So I think it's good to have a section on that. And the dialogue that you're entering into, the research that you're entering into, is also a specific kind of research, a specific kind of theology that you would like to engage with. So I would advise you to, from the start, explicitly state what kind of theology that you are going to do. In our case, it will probably be practical theology, but there are a myriad of approaches to practical theology, a myriad practical theologians. So define for yourself, I'm going to do practical theology, I'm going to do this kind of practical theology. In that section you could even continue with your methodology. It can be, I'm not going to say too much about that, but try and research and position yourself in the kind of theology that you're going to do. Missional theology or activist theology. Get a kind of a grip on the kind of theology that you're going to do. You're doing specific kinds of theologies, we've spoken about that, and you're entering into a dialogue to research this problem. And this is what it's so helpful to me, with specific theologians and specific scientists. So say, for example, you want to study what role can the liturgy play in fostering sustainable development. That's totally too broad. What would happen if you say, okay, I want to take James K.A. Smith as a starting point in his view on cultural liturgies and the liturgy, and I want to bring James K.A. Smith into dialogue with, and I'm not even au fait with economists, Schumacher on Small is Beautiful or whatever. It helps to limit the theologians and the scientists that you almost want to have invited at the table and almost virtually or imaginatively have them sit around the table and together focus on the problem. Some of the methodologies like that of Julian Miller, actually you actually go to a psychologist or an economist and you get that person's perspective on the problem. What I did is I invited, in inverted commas, certain theologians and certain psychologists to work on my clearly defined problem. So that is really helpful. If you have a problem, think positioning yourself. Think about what theologians you would like to invite to help you with this problem, to dialogue, to interact with the relevant psychologists, economists, sociologists, literature scholars, and then it limits your study, and it's manageable. So this is just a quick introduction. It really helped me. If you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me or post them on the group as well. I'll try and share more of these kinds of suggestions or thoughts with you. If you find them helpful, great. If not, please ignore them, and I wish you all the success with your studies.